panel, and I'm so glad that you could be here with us for this Work of Literary Merit event, the showing of the documentary Price of the Ticket about James Baldwin's life and works. I'm Abby Bogomolny from the English department. I'm joined by my colleagues Michael Hale and Angela Romagnoli. We'll both the three of us will say a few words about James Baldwin before and after the film. We've had this week some great conversations about the issues Baldwin raised in his prolific work on Monday and Wednesday's WOLM events. So I hope we'll be able to do that too here after the film. We have some mics set up to do that. I hope you'll join us next Monday, April 6th at 12 to 1 to hear Walter Turner, who's really special. He hosts the program on KPFA, Africa Today, and he's faculty in history at the College of Marin. So he'll be discussing the civil rights movement and James Baldwin's part in it. And then our final WOLM event will be Thursday, April 16th from 3:30 to 4:30. We're having Jewel Gomez, who will speak on race, desire, and the blues. Gomez is the author of the Gilda Stories and a play called Waiting for Giovanni, and that's a play that takes place inside the mind of James Baldwin before he was getting ready to publish Waiting for Giovanni. So hope you can join us there. So the film we're going to see is 87 minutes, and if you have to leave during the presentation, please leave quietly because the doors slam and they let in lights and so forth. So we're going to begin. Let's see. So most of you are here because you already know about James Baldwin, but if you don't, he's one of our major 20th century authors, civil rights activist, a prophetic voice, calling all Americans to heal our shared racial tragedy. And more than that, he's a revolutionary, a true revolutionary, dedicated to love, but not passive. One who spoke with a voice to confront injustice and do something about it. He was truly inspired, honest, eloquent. I'm going to say a few words about his private life, and then Michael will follow me today. The film does talk about his life, talks about the fact that he was gay, which gave him a very unique perspective on everything in advance of the discourse that we have today about race, class, gender, sexual orientation, etc. He was born in 1924 in Harlem. He became a preacher at age 14, but he left the church after 3 years. There was a primary incompatibility, and he was disillusioned with the promises of the church. He realized in his teens that he was attracted to other men, and his father was a minister. So right there you can see the quandary. He did fall in love with a woman named Grace. He lived with her for a year. He almost married her, and then came to his senses. He had amazing mentors. Buford Delaney, one, an older artist who lived in Greenwich Village, who convinced Baldwin to live on his own and move away from Harlem. And then he was in the Greenwich Village scene, meeting publishers and editors, and a young man that he was close with, named Eugene Worth, committed suicide in 1946. And Eugene was in love with Baldwin, and Baldwin did not return the favor. But his friend killing himself, jumping off the George Washington Bridge in the mid-40s, sent Baldwin into despair. And this was also a time when Baldwin was working out how to deal with the society that did not value him. So in 48, he left for Paris to escape this hopelessness he felt about the United States, the racism, the classism, the homophobia. Just to go the trajectory of his private life, to look at this, he met Lucien Happensberger, a Swiss runaway. He ran away from his family in 1949. You know, the artists, there was this milieu of misfits, you know, and artists in Paris. He and Lucien hit it off. They had this amazingly beautiful relationship. It was Lucien who brought Baldwin to the village where his family owned a chalet, where he wrote Stranger in the Village and finished his first novel. He was very close with Marlon Brando, and Baldwin always had problems with money. It was Brando who lent him $5 to come back, to fly back to the United States to meet with publishers at Knopf who were interested in publishing his first nonfiction text, Notes of a Native Son. Actually, not nonfiction, that's his fiction text, Notes of a Native Son. Further in his private life, Lucien did not want the same kind of relationship with Baldwin that Baldwin wanted with him. Lucien actually was more actively bisexual. He wanted to marry a woman, he wanted children, and this broke Baldwin's heart, and nonetheless, Lucien remained a lifelong friend to Baldwin. And in '57, Baldwin returns to the US and meets and works closely with black college students who are engaged in the civil rights struggle and the civil disobedience, and he begins his public speaking in the movement as an activist. So you'll see from the film that Baldwin's wit and his humor is unparalleled. I'm taking many of these quotes from a wonderful series about gays and lesbians in the United States. And so at one point, Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Segregation is dead in the South." And this was during the heat of the civil rights movement and victories that were happening, that was leading to the civil rights, passage of the Civil Rights Bill. And to which Baldwin replied, well, the question is just how long and how violent and how expensive the funeral is going to be, to segregation dying. So that's just a sample of his wit. But I love Baldwin because of his courage and the unique perspective that he was able to give us. And this is an example. What do Thomas Jefferson, Patrick Henry, and Alexander Hamilton all have in common? Does anybody know? Besides being involved with, the early birth and creation of our idealistic documents, right? Anything else? Anything else? Okay. Well, Baldwin would have said they fathered children with slave women. They were rapists. Okay. In Nobody Knows My Name, Baldwin argues that the white South's resistance to legitimate aspirations of black citizens had as much to do with sexual guilt as it did political, social, and economic power. So what I say by a unique perspective, Baldwin was able to see the personal dynamics involved in the black-white relationship, and the fact that African Americans are family. Half the black families in the South are related, to the judges and lawyers of the white families in the South, and that's so Baldwin, during his speaking career, made a point to identify himself. He said, for all you know, I could be your uncle, I could be your brother, And so when he spoke about race relations, he looked at it as a tragedy, because this is a family feud, The South, in fact, had been integrated long ago, according to Baldwin, but he said it had been integrated in the womb. Now, in the late 50s and early 60s, This was not the kind of public discourse that most people wanted to hear. So Baldwin lived his life, made no apologies. He believed any human being is much more complex than any category he or she can be placed in, right? You're bigger than any label. And he was fond of saying the fact that many Americans consider homosexuality a disease says more about them than it says about homosexuality. So that's the perspective that was 15, 20 years before people actually accepting that. He caught a lot of flack in the movement. Black Panther Eldridge Cleaver published a review of Baldwin's work. He called Baldwin's homosexuality a racial death wish. And Baldwin said in response, all that toy soldier has done is call me gay, so the fur was flying. But the homophobia was real. Now, Baldwin lived until 1987. By the end of his life, he was asked about the emerging gay movement, and being from a poor family, being from grassroots, he saw the gay civil rights movement as a white middle class thing. But he was happy that it had started. So we'll talk more about all the other issues that he raised. But I wanted to just mention some things about his private life, that he made no apologies. He lived his life openly. He came out on national television. And for that, I think all of us could be really grateful. And most of the comments and the quotes that came from what I just shared with you are from this Lives of Notable Gay Men and Lesbians, New York Chelsea House by Randall Kennan. So I'm going to turn over the podium to Michael Hale, and I hope you will enjoy the film coming up very shortly. Please give a warm welcome for Michael.
Thank you, everybody. This has been a phenomenal week for me as a new instructor here. It is exactly these kinds of things that I wanted to see happen, and it makes me feel so warm inside that we're engaged in these kinds of discussions. In fact, the event yesterday was just scheduled for 1 hour, but people stayed for 2 hours after the event for discussion. And what that showed me was that people are hungry for this kind of discussion. I think there are several people within our campus and in our community that say, well, let's not talk about difficult subjects like race. Let's teach as though this discussion's happening outside, but we need to be more quiet and reflective and contemplative and up in our ivory tower. And I think what conversations last night and conversations on Monday and other things that have been going on within the community and the Black Lives Matter panel that we had last month during Black History Month, it shows me, by the way, that was a 4-hour discussion, that one. What that shows me is that young people, community members, faculty, staff are interested and hungry for these discussions. They want to see these things happen. They want to talk about what's happening in the world. And I think James Baldwin speaks to us very clearly 50 years later in this very way. Somebody that is proud, who's unashamed, but has an uncanny sense of observation, taking the ability to see the very minute, to observe it, to analyze it, to understand it, and then to formulate an argument that is so powerful and so breathtakingly beautiful that it stops you in your tracks, it fills your heart, it fills your mind, and it makes you not only question your own sense of where your position is in the argument, so it makes you think and makes you critically think, which is exactly what he wanted you to do, but it also makes you have that mysterious wonder of what it's like to be a human, right? that we have such sharp critical faculties, that our mind is so can do such dazzlingly brilliant things. I think oftentimes we get trapped up in the fact that the world that we live in is sometimes very brutal and very oppressive. But I think by reading people like Baldwin, Toni Morrison, Amiri Baraka, some of the people that we were talking about last night, we understand that while the world is difficult, while the world is challenging, while there is oppression in the world, there is also beauty. That the struggle is not only hard and long, but the struggle is beautiful, filled with beautiful souls and beautiful people. And James Baldwin is just one. But what I want you to consider as you watch this movie is why, especially the young people in the audience, why don't I know about this person? Why has this person been taken away from so many high school curriculums and so many college classes no longer assigning him? Why are we shying away from a conversation of race within our country when at this very moment we are in the midst of a brilliant national discussion organized around the slogan Black Lives Matter that has brought us this really wonderful conversation on police accountability that we've needed so desperately long in our country. But while we have these conversations and while we are engaging in dialogue, as Americans don't often do about difficult subjects like race, why don't we have this history of the civil rights movement at our fingertips? Why don't we have these beautiful and brilliant writers like James Baldwin and his struggle and his story to help clarify not only our history, but that history be a usable history, right? So that we know how to formulate our social movements for the 21st century. The stories that we know about the civil rights movement are sanitized, almost Santa Claus-like stories that are made to make us feel good, but not made to make us challenge ourselves. And that's what Baldwin does. He makes us challenge ourselves. He does not fit that easy picture that the media likes to paint about the civil rights movement of, oh, we have this very nice man named Dr. King on one side, and we have this very evil, awful man named Malcolm X on the other. So the media loves to paint these extremes, which are, by the way, very false. But Baldwin defies all of those extremist categories, right? He did not want to be put in any of those categories. He wanted to develop his own position somewhere in between those two movements, and in fact influence those two movements in a very, very profound way. However, and this is what I want to underscore as we start the movie, we do not listen to the voices of the oppressed at our own peril. James Baldwin was talking about a middle position, trying to understand that we need to focus our attention on the anger and the frustration of young people in the northern ghettos. We need to have a message of love like Dr. King had, but we need to be militant and we need to be focused in on the men and the women on the street corners in the north that were feeling hopeless and that were jobless and that were feeling very frustrated. He understood that we needed to do both of those. And it wasn't until the later 60s that Dr. King started to realize that and formulated the Poor People's Campaign. And when Malcolm X left the Nation of Islam and understood that he needed to engage in multiracial unity and struggle in the organization of Afro-American unity. But by the time that people finally were listening to Baldwin, it had almost been too late. The frustration had grown too deep. And in cities, my brother was born during the Watts riots in 1965. I'm from Los Angeles. I lived through the largest riot in U.S. history when I was a teenager in Los Angeles. And I knew the bitterness and the frustration of the people on those street corners. So we did not listen to the voice of the most oppressed at our own peril. We should have been listening to him in 1955 when he was writing in Notes from a Native Son and trying to formulate these positions. And it gives us a valuable lesson for today, that we need to listen to those voices, and we need to think about the stories that are being sold to us that are trying to make us feel good. It is not our job, especially as college students, to feel good about our history. It is our job to confront our history, to challenge our history, and to ask how we can contribute to making history in the 21st century so that we can live in a better country. All right. I hope you enjoy the film, and I look forward to the discussion afterwards.
So we're ready to start the film. Thank you.
There are days, this is one of them, when you wonder what your role is in this country and what your future is in it. From my point of view, no label, and no slogan, and no party, and no skin color, and indeed no religion is more important than the human being.
Now, when you were starting out as a writer, you were black, impoverished, homosexual. You must have said to yourself, gee, how disadvantaged can I get?
Oh, no, I thought I hit the jackpot.
Oh, great.
It was so outrageous you could not go any further, you know. It had to be, so you had to find a way to use it.
Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. A long way from home. I first met Jim when he and I and the world were young enough to believe ourselves independently salvageable. We became friends in the late 50s, just as the United States was poised to make its quantum leap into the future, just as Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, and other Southerners were girding themselves for the second Civil War in 100 years, and just when Malcolm X was giving voice to the anger in the streets and in the minds of northern black city folks. In that riotous pulse of political fervor, James Baldwin and I met again and liked each other. In this particular society, we are supposed to be so contained. Men are supposed to be men, women are supposed to be women, and not really need anybody else. The ability to ask, will you be my brother? The courage to ask is often missing. James Baldwin was a brother, incredible.
He lived lived his life as witness. He wrote until the end. We hear of the writer's blocks of celebrated Americans, how great they are, so great indeed that their writing fingers have been turned to checks. But Jimmy wrote, he produced, he spoke, he sang. No matter the odds, he remained man and spirit and voice, ever expanding and ever more conscious. Let us hold him in our hearts and minds. Let us make him a part of our invincible black souls, the intelligence of our transcendence. Let our black hearts grow big, world-absorbing eyes like his, never closed. Let us one day be able to celebrate him like he must be celebrated if we are ever truly to be self-determining. For Jimmy was God's black revolutionary mouth, if there is a God, and revolution his righteous natural expression.
I was born in Harlem in 1924, when it was a very different place than it is now. My father came from New Orleans. My mother came from Maryland. And if they had waited, 2 more seconds, I might have been born in the South. The first house I remember was on Park Avenue, which is not the American Park Avenue, or maybe it is the American Park Avenue.
Uptown Park Avenue.
Uptown Park Avenue, where the railroad tracks are. We used to play on the roof, and I can't call it an alley, but near the river. It was a kind of dump, garbage dump. Those were the first scenes I remember. I remember my father had trouble keeping us alive. There were 9 of us, and I was the oldest, so I took care of the kids and dealt with Daddy, whom I understand much better now. Part of his problem was he couldn't feed his kids. But I was a kid and I didn't know that. And he was very religious, very rigid. In fact, in a word, he wanted power. He wanted Negroes to do, in effect, what he imagined white people did. That is to own the houses, to own U.S. Steel. And this is what, in effect, killed him, because there was something in him which could not bend. He could only be broken.